Welcome to today's class. Today's class is on COVID-19 and it is exclusively for the new interns. Okay, COVID for administrative purpose is divided into category A, B, and C. And what is this administrative purpose? You must have listened to our minister announcing so many category A patients, so many B patient, etc. So this is for administrative purpose that this classification is there. And category A means no fever at all. So that means the organism is still in the upper respiratory tract. So there is mild sore throat, cough, rhinorrhea, or sometimes other mucous membrane, for example, diarrhea. What is category B? Category B means high fever. And what is high fever? A fever that is refusing to come down or recurs after 4 to 6 hours of paracetamol. Severe sore throat. What is severe? It means it is difficult to swallow. Severe cough. That means a cough that is interfering with your conversation, for a child feeding. And a diarrhea with dehydration. These are all category B. And the second type of category B is a category A patient who has got significant comorbidities. And significant comorbidity means chronic kidney disease requiring dialysis, chronic liver disease, malignancy, obesity. Obesity is a real risk factor. Long-term steroid and other immunosuppressive treatments. And symptoms persisting beyond 5 to 7 days is also category B. Basically because by 5 to 7 days, we expect the viral multiplication to come down and possibly settle. And if it is persisting, if the symptom is persisting beyond 5 to 7 days, it possibly means either hyperinflammatory reaction or persistent viral replication, which makes it category B and not A. And what is category C? Anybody with breathlessness and a SpO2 less than 94 is category B. I'm sorry, category C. In category B, whatever be the signs and symptoms, saturation is maintained. But category C, saturation drops. That is the main difference between these two. And of course, danger signs. Danger signs we all know: inability to talk, altered sensorium, seizures, cyanosis, hypotension, etc. Now comes to the clinical classification. As a doctor or as an intern, you must classify clinically, not as per administrative classification. So what is clinical classification? Uncomplicated upper respiratory infection without hypoxia, without breathlessness. That is mild. So actually mild will include administrative category of A and B. So mild means your respiratory rate is less than 24 and SpO2 is more than 94. And what is moderate? It is category C of administrative classification. It means there is breathlessness, but saturation is maintained above 90. So it is between 90 and 94. And respiratory rate is between 24 and 30. And what is severe? Severe means saturation has dropped below 90. Respiratory rate has gone above 30. There is organ involvement, hypoxia, hypotension, and danger signs. So I think clinical classification is clear, and that is what you are going to do when the patient comes to you. So your classification will be mild, moderate, or severe. Now, this timeline, see, this is the time course, and this is the severity of the illness. Severity, see, goes on increasing as the time passes. So in the stage 1, it is mild. It is mostly an upper respiratory infection, as we said earlier. So mild constitutional symptoms, dry cough, diarrhea, headache, etc. And the counts may be low, lymphopenia may be there. And in second stage means it is pulmonary, phase where viral replication has started coming down and host inflammatory response has started coming up. So both are there in the pulmonary phase where there is shortness of breath and hypoxia. Quite understandable because that is the pulmonary phase. And third is hyperinflammatory phase, which means body's inflammatory response is now the major culprit, which means many organs are involved, like lungs causing ARDS, systemic inflammatory response syndrome, shock, cardiac failure, etc. And the lab will show elevated inflammatory markers of different types that we will come to. Now, the treatment depends on one, risk stratification, second, stage of the disease and severity, third, drug availability and affordability. Now, natural history, just concentrate on this one. This is day 0. And initially, there are no symptoms or minimal symptoms. Viral replication goes on and on. And then you get the mild disease, then get moderate disease. By that time, the viral replication comes down. So by the time you have severe disease, your viral replication is almost settled. And by the time you have moderate disease, that is beyond 5 to 7 days, usually, the inflammation starts and it goes on increasing. And by the time you get severe disease, you have significant inflammation. So in moderate disease, you have viral replication and body's inflammation, both are contributing. In severe disease, inflammation contributes more as compared to viral. This will have a take on the management. That's why I'm stressing on this. So antiviral therapy, where should we give? We can give right from asymptomatic phase if you want. But remdesivir, which is the accepted antiviral therapy right now, that is costly. So one course will cost 20 to 30,000 rupees. And all the asymptomatic patients, if you follow them up, more than 90% will recover without even visiting the hospital. So such a waste of money if you give antiviral at this stage. So we reserve antiviral to a later stage. And the current evidence show that remdesivir does not actually give the predicted effect, which means once the virus is inside the cell, this antibiotic doesn't or antiviral doesn't go into the cell and kill the virus. So once the virus incorporates itself into the cell, then it is difficult to take care of it. So when we give it late, the response is poor. So ideally, it should be given, say, around about 5 days when your symptoms actually started, but it has not progressed much. Now we have monoclonal antibody. Monoclonal antibody, again, you can give very early because it will bind to the virus binding sites. So virus cannot bind, virus gets neutralized. So it is best given at this early stage. But unfortunately, it is so costly. It's 60,000 rupees. So you can't give to an asymptomatic patient because 90% plus will recover without even a visit to the hospital. So we wait, wait beyond this. So by the time you have mild illness, actually you must give monoclonal antibody. Because if you give later, as I said earlier, these antibodies will not go inside the cell and tackle the virus. No. So we have to give it earlier than moderate or severe illness. So in mild illness, you have to give, but mild illness is in lakhs and lakhs. So you can't give. So what we are doing is a mild illness in somebody having risk factors. That is our strategy of giving monoclonal antibody. And anti-inflammatory will give in moderate and severe, possibly in combination with antiviral. just a little bit history into 2020. This is not important for your management, but still you must know what happened actually. See, in 2020, we used to give hydroxychloroquine at this stage. Why? Because hydroxychloroquine is an immunomodulator, and that's why we are giving it for SLE, rheumatoid arthritis, etc. But it is a very slow acting and very mild as compared to steroid. So now that steroid have come and approved for use, there is no role for hydroxychloroquine. But if steroid were not there, if you give hydroxychloroquine at this stage, by the time it is 7 days, some immunomodulatory effect will happen and this inflammation will be subdued. And that was why we were giving hydroxychloroquine in 2020 and we were getting good results also. But then the industry also had stepped in to make us withdraw the hydroxychloroquine, saying that there is no evidence. And possibly they wanted to push remdesivir, because at that time they thought if you give remdesivir, it will be taking care of the virus and there will be no inflammation. But that was not to be, because a virus that is inside the cell cannot be taken care of by the remdesivir. And remdesivir is not such a wonderful drug. And WHO now says it is of no use, need not be included in the essential drug for COVID. Regarding antibody also, there was some industry pressure, because we in 2020 used plasma, convalescent plasma with high titer of antibodies. So that is similar to monoclonal antibody only. Monoclonal, you synthesize it by in the lab. The other one is you take it from somebody's body. It contained a lot of antibodies, but then again they came out with the argument that there is no evidence for plasma, as though plasma is something dangerous thing. So you cannot give it. So we had to give it as a compassionate ground to a patient who is seriously ill. So a patient who is seriously ill, whether you are giving plasma or monoclonal antibody, they are going to succumb. So that is exactly what happened. Plasma failed to save seriously ill patients. And then they came out with the verdict that plasma has no effect on COVID-19 and introduced a monoclonal antibody. And here they specifically say you give it very early, if possible here, right from the asymptomatic period. If you use plasma also from this period, the same effect will be there. Suppose I use monoclonal antibody late in the disease course, in severe disease, they are going to die also. So I can prove that monoclonal antibody is useless. So it is all actually industry-driven tamashas. Actually, this I mentioned because as new doctors, you must know that industry has got its own role in treatment decisions, and you have to unfortunately go with it, because the so-called evidence only the pharma industry can generate, because the studies are huge. Individuals or even institutions cannot do it. So this is not in relation to your COVID management, just to tell you what is happening in industry. Now, we said we manage depending on risk stratification. And what is it? Risk stratification means comorbidities. Uncontrolled diabetes, not any diabetes, uncontrolled diabetes, uncontrolled hypertension, pre-existing cardiac disease. For example, you have had a stent, pre-existing pulmonary disease like COPD, not a well-controlled asthma, chronic kidney disease, chronic liver disease. And two things very important, obesity and age above 65, both are high risk category. Then in clinical assessment, you can have high risk, for example, hypoxia and respiratory distress. Both are high risk if it is already there. Then, of course, the danger signs. And laboratory values, there are quite a lot of values, but as house surgeons or interns, you can memorize these two. CRP more than 100 and D-dimer more than 1000 makes it high risk. Now, as new doctors, you will be forced to take CT both by patient and their bystanders. So the thing is, nearly 2/3 of patients with asymptomatic COVID-19, if you take HRCT, you will have findings. These do not progress. So CT for an asymptomatic will not affect the management. That is one thing. Second, very early in the disease, in the first week, the CT findings may not be there because the CT finding at least partially is due to the hyperinflammatory response. So early, you may not get a response. Now, the correlation between extent of lung involvement by CT and hypoxia or symptoms are not perfectly matched also. So you cannot take a decision based only on CT. So you'll have to take decision based on clinical. But of course, CT is indicated for any moderate or severe. You can definitely take CT, especially for acute deterioration like pulmonary embolism, suspected fungal infection, or rarely when PCR is negative and you still suspect COVID, then there is a radiological criteria for COVID X-ray, COVID CT. So you can, for that matter also, you can consider CT. So now how will you manage mild COVID, clinically mild COVID? Fever, you give paracetamol, plenty of rest, plenty of sleep, balanced diet. Many vitamins are advised, of which at least some evidence is available for vitamin D. So you can always give vitamin D. Diarrhea, especially for a child, you give ORS and zinc. No unnecessary zinc, because zinc is actually necessary for the mucormycosis growth also. So why we give them manure to grow? Cough, anybody who is coughing should have a prone position, at least for some time. Because when you are prone, your base of the lung becomes superior. Base of the lung comes up. And the COVID pneumonia is at the base. So aeration at the base is much better when you lie prone. Cough syrup, of course, you can use, but of doubtful value. And in addition, as got sedation, so your assessment of patient also gets affected. And cough with wheeze always gives salbutamol. Meter dose inhaler with mask and spacer is the preferred method, because nebulization is aerosol generated. Avoid severe cold exposure. We must avoid, like AC in say 18 degree, 20 degree, etc. Because the COVID, as long as it is there in the upper respiratory tract, we are not worried. But it goes down the airways to the lower respiratory tract. And anything that is going down the airways will be swept out by the cilia, whether it is COVID or some other virus or a bacteria. But when the chest is exposed to very cold temperature, the ciliary motility actually becomes less. And there is more possibility of what has gone into the airways to remain there and cause pneumonia. And steaming is not beneficial. And in addition, it can cause mucosal injury. And if mucosal injury occurs, and if you are destined to have mucormycosis, that injured site can act as a nidus for mucormycosis. So do not advise steaming, because there is no benefit. No antivirals or antibiotic for mild case. Secondary infection is rare. If at all it occurs, first-line antibiotic like Amox will be enough. And anybody having a cough persisting beyond 5 days means there is a component of our inflammatory reaction. So budesonide, high dose, 800 microgram twice a day must be started. And as interns, you must keep this chart always filled up. It is easy to assess the patient if this chart is there, like breath rate, for a child taking feeds or not, for a adult, whether talking is getting interrupted frequently, urine output, danger signs any, and pulse rate and SpO2 readings from pulse oximeter. And when will you call your consultant? Increased workup breathing, even with oxygen support. Even if saturation is okay, there is no reason why the breathing difficulty should go up. So you must call. Second is saturation falling less than 94. Then a patient who has been in the ward, but fever is running for more than 5 or 7 days. That means the viral replication is supposed to stop by 5 to 7 days, but it is going on. So call the consultant. Then danger signs, multi-organ dysfunction, etc. Moderate and severe, definitely you give oxygen with the aim of keeping oxygen above 94. Both will require steroid, either methylprednisolone or equivalent dose of dexamethasone or even prednisolone oral, and anticoagulation. Severe will go into ICU. The moderate can be managed in the high dependency unit. Yeah, this is just to demonstrate why you require steroid. See, as the time goes on, the asymptomatic becomes mild illness, then becomes moderate illness. At that time, viral replication has started coming down. And by the time it is severe illness, it is the viral replication has almost stopped, but the inflammation has gone up. So that is why, so any moderate to severe will require steroid. So that is clear. Any moderate to severe will require antiviral also, because at this particular point of time, that is severe illness, we do not know how much is contributed by the viral replication, how much by inflammation. So you will have to give both. Steroid should be given not too early. And that's what I said. You cannot give steroid here because it is only viral replication that is going on in the mild disease and early moderate. But then it is inflammation all the way. So you need steroid. So not too early, not too late, because if you do not give steroid until this time, the maximum inflammation is already over. So whatever damage that is destined to happen has already happened. Then what is the big point in giving steroid from here onwards? So give it somewhere here, not here. So steroid, not late, not early. And how early can we give? Whenever the saturation drops below 94, definitely. And in addition, try 6-minute walk test or a 40-step walk test in the room itself. And if the saturation drops to 94 or less, again, you can give steroid. So you provoke and see whether the saturation is dropping and then give steroid. So that is an early steroid. And in COVID, there is immune dysregulation, especially in the late moderate disease and severe disease. So endotheliitis, because the ACE receptors are there in many locations. So endothelium gets inflamed or gets damaged. Once the endothelium is damaged, then the coagulation cascade gets activated. It's like you getting an injury. Once there is an injury, the coagulation cascade gets activated. So endothelial injury means the body senses it as an injury and activates the coagulation cascade. And hence, all these COVID-19 moderate and severe patients will require anticoagulation, prophylactic anticoagulation. And those who have got proved thrombus will require therapeutic anticoagulation. So this shows all these things you need not know. ACE2 receptors are there in so many locations. So microthrombus will damage so many organs. And microthrombus and macrothrombus can also occur. So this is the importance of anticoagulation, and you prevent this. So once you prevent this, organ damage can be prevented. And once you diagnose thrombus, then naturally you will have to give therapeutic anticoagulation. Prophylactic anticoagulation means usually there are many drugs, but we usually use enoxaparin, 40 milligram once a day. This is prophylactic. Therapeutic means double. So instead of once a day, you give it twice a day. So that is therapeutic. And what are the contraindications for anticoagulation? It stands to common sense. Low platelet, then recent major trauma, recent surgery, or an anticipated surgery, extreme hypertension like 200 or so. Because suppose that hypertension patient bleeds, then it will not stop. So you cannot give anticoagulation at that point of time. So when there are no contraindications, moderate and severe will require prophylactic anticoagulation. Now, remdesivir, when will you give? Again, any time from here onwards you can give, but being a costly drug, we will wait for at least some symptom to come. So 5 to 7 days, we will progress to moderate disease. So it should be given before 5 days ideally, and possibly not later than 10 days, because this is the 10th day. Beyond 10 days, there is hardly any viral replication. So if possible, if the patient is sufficiently symptomatic, start before 5 days. Never start after 10 days, because it is going to be a waste of money. Remdesivir has no mortality benefit. It is no longer recommended by WHO. And the original hype was all industry driven, as I said first. Being an antiviral drug, it has got role only early in the disease, preferably to start within 5 days in a category C patient. Category C means administrative category C for our clinical, moderate, and severe disease. Not recommended beyond 10 days, that I already said. The dose is 200 milligram first day, followed by 100 milligram once a day for 4 days, and not indicated in significant liver dysfunction or renal. Suppose a patient is on remdesivir, on steroid, in ICU, and not improving in 24 to say 48 hours. That will require additional immunomodulation, and hence you must give tocilizumab. Because by the time the patient is seriously ill, it is almost day 10. So there is really no point in giving one more antiviral or increasing the dose of antiviral. So what is to be increased is immunomodulation, and that's why tocilizumab. And it is to be given early, like within 24 to 48 hours of ICU admission if the patient is not improved. The dose is given there. The second, the blue one is JAK inhibitor. That is, we are not using it much. And the indication is, suppose somebody, you cannot give steroid, for example, a totally uncontrolled diabetic. Even in a totally uncontrolled diabetic, the ideal thing would be give escalate insulin, control the diabetic, and give steroid. But if you are not willing for that, you can try JAK inhibitor. Or suppose you are already on steroid and tocilizumab is not available, then again you can try JAK. But otherwise, it is not much indicated. The indication and dose is given there. I'm not going in detail because we're not using it. Now coming to monoclonal antibody. They started using single monoclonal antibody, but then they found that with immune escape variants, the virus is escaping. So they decided combination. So this is the one that is available now, manufactured by Roche, available by Cipla Marketing in the name REGEN-COV. It should be given, as I said earlier, as early as possible. Even if it is given in the asymptomatic period, possibly it can abort the disease. But then you do not give it basically because it's an expensive drug and most of the time it will be useful. It will not be useful because even without the drug, the patient may have improved. In mild illness also, if they have calculated and what they find is to prevent one particular patient getting hospitalized, you may have to treat about 45, which means at this stage of mild illness, if you give antibody, monoclonal antibody, 44 will be given in patients who possibly did not require of the 45. And hence, we insist that you give monoclonal early in the disease, mild disease itself, but only in those with comorbidities. And comorbidity or high risk, we have already discussed. You can rewind and see. Now, monoclonal antibodies should be administered as early as possible, I said, but not more than 10 days, because beyond 10 days, what is happening is only hyperinflammatory response where monoclonal antibody has no role. And those who are already deteriorated into the stage of requiring oxygenation or ventilation, then again, there is no role because you have deteriorated to the stage of oxygenation and ventilation means it is beyond 7 days and possibly not much of viral application. It is all your inflammatory reaction. And this originally we used to give azithromycin, etc., because of sore throat. Now we know this sore throat is all virus, so we will not give. Vitamin C you can give, no, although there is no proved role, there is no harm. But high dose zinc is not recommended. Basically, I said mucormycosis also requires zinc for its growth, so we do not want to give fertilizer for that. This is not really contraindication. There is no point in giving beyond 10 days. That's it. And renal impairment and hepatic impairments are actually not absolute contraindications. And pregnancy, actually, the Kerala protocol allows monoclonal antibody to be used in compassionate ground during pregnancy, which means you tell the patient that there is no evidence to show that it is safe, but still, theoretically, we have not found, theoretically and practically so far, we have not found bad effects. Basically, my viewpoint is a pregnant lady, a 20-year or 25-year-old pregnant lady is more precious than the unborn child. So here towards saving the mother rather than the baby. And a sudden deterioration of a patient, always think of, say, pulmonary embolism, where there'll be a rapid rise in D-dimer to many thousands and acute worsening of oxygenation, but you do a CT and the COVID-19 pneumonia has not worsened. So that is the sort of finding that you get in embolism. Now a few slides on COVID-19 related multi-system inflammatory syndrome in children. This is a life-threatening complication occurring 3 to 4 weeks after a COVID infection or asymptomatic COVID infection. That is the important thing. You can have MISC following totally asymptomatic COVID infection. So the importance of keeping children in a family where there was COVID. That family must be kept under follow by the JPHN for any symptom for about 4 to 6 weeks, so that we can pick them up for early treatment, because this is, although life-threatening, it is essentially a treatable condition. So we have to pick it up. And the only problem is it can come in a asymptomatic COVID infection also. So you will not know that the child ever had COVID, but start with presentation of MISC. So usually it is a persistent febrile illness, skin rash, congested mucous membrane and conjunctiva, acute abdomen, at times simulating appendicitis, BP fall, hemorrhage, and organ involvement. What are the diagnostic criteria for COVID-associated MIS-C? Age group is 0 to 19, that is child. In adult, if it comes, it is called MIS-A, adult multisystem inflammatory syndrome. In adults, it is less common, but still possible. So all will have fever. So that is an essential criteria. Plus any two of the following 5. And what are these 5? One is rash or conjunctival congestion, mucocutaneous inflammation, hypotension or shock, features of myocardial dysfunction, pericarditis, valvulitis, coronary abnormalities, etc. Evidence of coagulopathy, that is PTA, PTT, elevated, and acute gastrointestinal problems, which can even be just diarrhea. Plus, inflammatory markers are elevated, like CRP, ESR, and evidence of COVID-19 infection. It could be RT-PCR, it could be antigen test, it could be antibody positivity, or a history of contact with COVID-19, or even a history of COVID-19 in the family. Now, what is the investigation pathway of COVID-19 related MIS-C? Suppose there is enough evidence to suspect MIS-C. So that is what is written here that we have already discussed in detail. Do ESR and CRP. Need not be both. Either is also okay. If ESR is elevated more than 40, go for the next set of investigation. That is lymphopenia. Lymphocyte may be less, platelet may be less, serum albumin may be less, sodium may be less. In that case, go for the second line investigation, D-dimer, coagulation profile, ferritin, TROP-T, NT-proBNP, LDH. IL-6 is not essential. It is not commonly available also. It is not essential. Echocardiography, yes, for all patients must be done. If criteria for diagnosing MIS-C is fulfilled, then don't wait. You can either give methylprednisolone 30 milligram per kilogram for 3 to 5 days. The range is 10 to 30 milligram per kilogram per day, followed by oral prednisolone 2 milligram per kilogram per day till CRP normalizes or ESR normalizes, but CRP is more trustworthy, and then taper over 2 to 3 weeks. This methylprednisolone regime is preferred in those with shock. IVIG is generally preferred for small children, especially when the presentation is more like Kawasaki disease. Here, if there is myocardial contractility issues, you will have to give IVIG for a longer period of time, longer than 10 or 12 hours. Usually it is given in about 8 to 12 hours, but in myocardial contractility issues, you have to prolong. Suppose the fever doesn't subside in 36 hours, that is 1.5 days, then IVIG can be given. 1 minute. Sorry for the phone call. If fever persists more than 1.5 days, then if IVIG was given, now give methylprednisolone. If originally methylprednisolone was given, then give IVIG. And then follow it up with aspirin, that is antiplatelet dose, 3 to 5 milligram per kilogram per day. If platelet count is nearly 1 lakh or more, 80,000 is the cutoff that is given. And any coronary abnormalities, you start low molecular weight paradigm, 1 milligram per kilogram per dose. Also, when ejection fraction is very much compromised, like less than 35%, again, you give anticoagulation because within this ventricular cavity, the blood is relatively stagnant and can produce thrombosis. Now, repeat echo at 2 weeks, that is generally at discharge rather than 2 weeks. Then another one at 4 to 6 weeks. And then one at 6 months to 1 year, especially if initial echo was abnormal. Continue aspirin until the 4-week or 6-week echocardiogram showing that coronaries are not involved. If the child requires low molecular weight heparin, for example, aneurysm of the coronary, then the child may be discharged on warfarin. It may be required for a few months till thrombus resolution. Children with MISC need periodic follow-up for about 6 to 12 months. Cardiac MRI, if it is available, can be done before the follow-up is terminated. I would like to acknowledge Dr. Aravind, head of the Department of Infectious Disease, for inputs on adult COVID. Thank you, Aravind. Hope this session was helpful. Thank you. Thank you for your time.